If you can believe it, Breaking Benjamin has been around for over 20 years, and despite their hiatus in the 2010s, the band has released 6 top-notch records and sold more than 7 million copies in the US alone. It's been 4 years since their last original record, so fans are waiting with bated breath for the announcement of a new album. In the meantime, let's look back at the last 2 decades and rank every Breaking Benjamin studio album from worst to best. Taking the bottom spot on today's list is Saturate, Breaking Benjamin's debut album. Rarely do you see a band's earliest album stand up against their later releases, and Saturate is no different. The songs are decent, but none of them are all that memorable when compared to the wealth of tracks this band has to offer. The album lacks the band's trademark bravado and epicness, but its composition is very similar to the records that would follow. So if that's all that you're interested in, this album holds up well. However, once you consider Benjamin Burnley's raw, unprocessed vocals, the album does lose quality. Let me be clear, I don't dislike his voice on this record, I just don't prefer it. The late 90s / early 2000s grunge style is just not my favorite, and since it's front and center in every single song, it's hard to appreciate all of the other elements in those songs. Additionally, since Burnley was only 24 when this album came out, it's no surprise that his vocal abilities leave me wanting. Of course, if I were to record an album now and then look back on it in 20 years, I'd probably have the same thoughts about myself, so I don't hold it against him. It's just the reality of music and how artists will hone their craft over time. If Burnley sounded the same way he did 20 years ago, there would be serious cause for concern, no matter if he sounded good or bad. At the end of the day, Saturate is not a record to dismiss entirely, but it's also not one I'd go out of my way to listen to. If I'm in the mood for Breaking Benjamin, there are several other records that will provide an enjoyable, satisfying experience, like the ones coming up next on this list. So stick around to the end of the video to see what I think is the best Breaking Benjamin album of all time. For now, we're moving on chronologically to their sophomore release, We Are Not Alone. Just like the last record, We Are Not Alone lacks the power and production value of modern releases, but not quite to the same degree. All around, it's more polished and consistent all the way throughout, which is why it performed significantly better on release. It's evident that the band was slowly moving in the right direction towards their modern sound, which shows their dedication to constant improvement. There are a couple of big tracks from this time, like So Cold, Firefly, Rain. All of these songs helped bring the band into the mainstream, but nowadays, most of these tracks are considered oldies but goodies, not concert regulars. Where this album edges out its predecessor is in Burnley's vocals. His composition, pitch, tone, and mixing are all significantly improved, meaning he's easier to listen to while maintaining that grungy rock sound. The instrumentals of this record are nothing special or groundbreaking, but that's made up for by the improved vocals. Burnley is progressively growing into his signature style during this album, which is great to see. However, it's not quite enough to overtake the record that follows, since the band just continues to improve more and more. Above all else, this is an album that delivers on the expectations for a second release, but it does not go above and beyond. We Are Not Alone is a stepping stone in the band's chronology towards bigger and better things, and after 20 years, it's natural for it to fade into the background as they explore new ground. And Breaking Benjamin certainly tries out some new ideas in the next record on this list, which just so happens to be their most recent release, Ember. This record starts off with a bang, and its opening barrage of tracks set the tone for the rest of the album. That tone, and the entire album for that matter, can be described with one word: heavy. Heavy guitars, heavy drums, heavy vocals, heavy production, heavy everything. And while that may sound great on the surface, it does come with some cons. Ember is intense, so much so that I'm often fatigued by the end of it. I rarely find myself listening all the way through, and instead, I'll usually switch off to another record by the halfway point, simply to give myself some auditory reprieve. Ember's production value is so crunchy and gritty that it wears on me more so than other records. The kick drum contributes a lot to this because it's heavily compressed, and it has that 2010s pop punk click sound that I really don't like. Also, instead of doubling vocals with harmony like in previous records, vocals are almost always doubled with screaming, and it's just relentless. I like screams as a complement to the music, but not as a main dish, so they become grating after a while. But here's the thing: Everything I just said could be treated as pros or cons, simply based on your preferences. Some people will enjoy that gritty production, and others will be exhausted by it. It's all a matter of opinion. One thing's for sure though, whether you enjoy or hate the mixing of this record, it is objectively well written. Its best songs are front-loaded, and it gets a little repetitive near the end, but every track is written, performed, and recorded well. There are some experimental ideas, but there's nothing groundbreaking, which makes it a perfect fit for the middle of this list. Third place goes to their third record, Phobia, from 2006. Phobia sold very well on release, and its big single, The Diary of Jane, is still one of Breaking Benjamin's most popular songs, with a whopping 400 million streams on Spotify. It also saw the introduction of Chad Zeliga on drum set, who proved to be an awesome influence on the band's sound during the late 2000s. In typical Breaking Benjamin fashion, this record is powerful and grungy, with an impressive level of consistency. There aren't many surprises or jaw-dropping moments, but it's got enough to really satisfy longtime fans. There are a lot of great songs like The Diary of Jane, Breath, and Until the End, but much like the previous entry on this list, its first half is much more engaging than its second. Once you reach about track 8, you've heard just about everything unique this album has to offer. The remaining 5 songs are decent, but nothing about them will stand out and draw you back in on return listens. Even though I had the same critique regarding Ember, this album manages to overtake it simply because of the production quality. It's a little less produced, and that makes it way easier to listen through all the way without getting overstimulated. Its auditory identity isn't as distinct and punchy as Ember, but just the fact that I can tolerate listening to it from top to bottom more often means that it's much more enjoyable and approachable. And for that reason, Phobia claims the number 3 spot on this list. Before we move on to the runner-up for this list, don't forget to hit the like button if you're enjoying the video. It helps spread it to a lot more people across YouTube, and it helps out me and the channel a ton. The runner-up for this list is the 2009 release Dear Agony. This album holds a special place in my heart for its influence on my childhood. Along with Green Day and Linkin Park, Breaking Benjamin was a huge part of my life in the early 2010s. I remember watching Halo videos on YouTube with songs from Dear Agony as the soundtrack and thinking it was the coolest shit I'd ever seen. At that time, no action movie could top the spectacle of Master Chief just mowing down legions of the Covenant to the tune of Into the Nothing. Now, looking back on the album a decade later, it stands the test of time as the hallmark of Breaking Benjamin's iconic style. Each of its 11 tracks are distinct and polished, and the record takes you on an intense emotional journey across its 42-minute runtime. In typical fashion, no time is wasted bringing you into the record with tracks like Fade Away and I Will Not Bow, and that pace is kept up throughout the rest of the entire album. This record is dark and somber with melancholy songs like Give Me a Sign, Anthem of the Angels, and the title track, Dear Agony. There isn't a moment of time wasted, and every song fits together perfectly. A little too perfectly, if we're being honest. It's no secret that Breaking Benjamin is often formulaic with their writing and their guitar tones, and this album is a perfect example of that. It's cohesive to the point that some of the songs will actually blend together. It's a minor flaw though, since all of these songs are still good and worth listening to. Like I mentioned before, there are enough tracks on Dear Agony that do stand out to set this record apart from all others. Save for one. If I had to pick one album to showcase everything great about Breaking Benjamin, it would be Dark Before Dawn. Take everything great about Dear Agony, polish it up by another 10%, and you've got this record. Following a 4-year hiatus plagued by illness and legal controversy, the band's lineup was completely reworked aside from frontman Benjamin Burnley, who produced and composed most of the album completely by himself. And surprisingly enough, this record was a huge commercial success, debuting at number 1 on the Billboard 200 and selling 360,000 copies in the US after only a couple of weeks. So, what makes the record worthy of the number 1 spot, both on this list and on the Billboard charts? Simply put, every song is great. It's everything you could ever want from Breaking Benjamin, and it's engaging from start to finish. Songs like Failure, Angels Fall, and Defeated carried this album prior to release, but I think any of its 12 tracks could have been successful. If I could change one thing about this record though, I would switch the order of the ending tracks. I think Ashes of Eden is such a cool, emotional song with a powerful and bittersweet ending, but that ending is undercut by the instant return to aggression with Defeated. Swapping those two songs would have allowed the ending to breathe a little bit more and flow straight into the outro track. It would have felt more like a weight was being lifted off your shoulders so you could breathe finally after listening to such an intense record. With the power of digital streaming, I can arrange the album however I want, but it would have been nice to have this on the original record. Nonetheless, Dark Before Dawn is 43 minutes of hard rock at its finest, and until the band proves otherwise, it remains as the best Breaking Benjamin album of all time. This band has had a storied history, and their musical journey over the last 2 decades has been so interesting to witness. However, they're just one of many rock bands looking to share their talent with the world, like the groups in this playlist, which you should check out next. Let me know your choice for album rankings in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.